In this video, we'll discuss the shareable groups of settings used in Builder, which we sometimes refer to as flavors. We'll talk about how they're used, how you create them, and what their detailed attributes are. The main thing to keep in mind though, is that by far the majority of interactions you're ever going to have with them are no more than this. Pick an action, select from the drop down, and you're done. Everything else I'm going to talk about is things that will happen on an exceptional basis, so it's not key to being able to configure a case. The main attributes which use these flavored options approach are when it's due, who does it go to, and for actions only, general settings. So we know how to select them from a drop-down, but if we want to look at them in a bit more detail, I can select the ellipses here to bring up a detailed pop-up. Let's start with when is it due. If I wanted to make changes to here, we can see that this is all locked down. So there are some rules around when a flavor gets locked down and can't be modified anymore. If it's being shared, i.e. it's being used by more than one case ticket or action, then it becomes locked down. Or if it's been used by something that's now live, it's locked. The only way to create a modified one is to click on this clone link here and create a new one. You'll be asked to specify a new name and to tweak whatever settings you want to. So let's create a due date here, which is 3 hours from start. Okay, so this will allow us to go down and look through the structure of a due date flavor. This list here is a list of the due date methods. Now I've got a number of different ways that the system can start to calculate a due date. It could be based on the start date of that piece of work, or perhaps a fixed day of the current month or the last day of the month, or it could even reference a certain schedule. Some of these bits of information or some of these options that I choose might require me to specify more information. But let's just go with start date for the moment. Once I've got my baseline date, I can then add or subtract a certain number of hours, days, working hours, or working days in order to reach the exact date time that I want. Now, if I choose working hours or working days, then I have to supply a working calendar and specify precisely what working calendar this due date method should use. I can define the supplier calendar to be used or the customer calendar, or I can choose a specific other calendar, which I would have to select from somewhere in the system. The next setting I can choose to tick or not tick is to flip to the next morning if it's at the end of a day. So what does this mean? Well, it can often be the case that your due date calculation will end up with a due date time that's at the end of your working day. So for example, 5 p.m. on a Thursday. If you want that to remain 5 p.m. on a Thursday, then you leave this blank. But if instead you'd rather that flips so that the due date for it is, for example, 9 a.m. on the Friday, the immediate first working moment of the next morning, then you tick this box here. You can specify whether you want the agent to be able to override this due date on the ticket case or action screen. Your options here are yes, no, or only on creation of the original piece of work. And you can tick whether you want to add the wait time to the due date, i.e. add any time that the work is paused to the overall due date that's being calculated. So if I'm happy with that, and I'll know whether I've filled in sufficient information because the banner at the top will either be green or not, then I can hit create. And the new flavor will be saved and set as the due date. Let's move on to the next, which is who does it go to? Allocation rules. Let's click here and see some of the detail. I'll create another clone and I'll give it a new name. The main thing I'm asked for here is to determine which queue it should go to. So I can choose the name of the exact queue that I want. I could even free text search to find it. Let's give it to the HR queue, change the name. In addition to this, I could also choose to push the piece of work to a specific position. Again, I've got various options here. I could choose a team by path, which brings me up additional picker controls, or I could just say I want it to go to the packet starter. I can choose a backup position as well as the primary one, and for both of these I can choose whether I want these people to be CC'd on any emails that go out. I can also choose whether I want them to be informed about the allocation via email. And lastly, we've got the general settings pop-up. So let's choose to clone this, and that will allow us to go through and look at the information in the general settings. So I can specify the action instructions that would appear on screen. I can specify the standard operating procedure URL if there is one. I can say whether I want the action to autocomplete upon timeout. It's possible in an action to see the link for the parent case, but I could choose to hide this on that action screen if I want. And I can also choose whether the entire case should be paused if this action is put on pause. Further on down the screen, I've got some information about record count. I can choose whether I want to show that on the action screen and update the case value or not update the case value. I can specify how long I think this piece of work is going to take for a human to do. I could specify whether it can be performed by a certain kind of robot farm or a certain group of robots. So let's choose one here. If I specify that, then I should also say how long I think the robots take to do this. That information can be used in MI. Lastly, we look at the skills that might be involved. And this allows us to tag the activity to say whether it involves perhaps writing long texts or following basic rules or any sense of empathy or human emotion. This allows us to tag activities and actions that might be amenable in the long term to exposing to robots or robot farms. One thing to note about the general settings flavors is that while the other two sets of flavors are global, the general settings flavors are only shared for this specific action type. So wherever the benefit approval check action is used, you'll see the same list of standard general settings flavors to choose from.